Right. So after watching the fundamentals and application of internal audit videos, now you are going to see how easy past papers, right? So this is the continuation of discussion of the pilot paper, right? The very first paper. And you can see once you understand the fundamentals, application and writing, right? Application is not that easy, but you need to have some practical awareness, right? Practical knowledge in doing that, and that is what we are trying to achieve through past paper. So this is the section after your 50 marks, the main question, the section B. The good thing is here you can actually select 2 out of the 3 questions. One of the first thing you will do in the exam is to glance through these 3 and select the one that you can get the maximum mark. So let us navigate in that sense what these 3 questions are and from what areas of the syllabus these questions have been tested, right? Now when you go through that, here the first, part ABC. So we are looking 25 marks. Assess the action required to achieve and sustain organizational independence of the internal audit function. So when I did that very first but most critical session on internal auditing, covering A to Z of what you need to do in very short video, less than 2 hours, that gives you the full knowledge that is required to answer internal audit related question, while your study text has about maybe 100 plus pages. The essence was covered in that video. So after watching that video, when you look at this, you can easily figure out, you see, in exam success is all about during the limited time, how do you write concise answers. ඒ කියන්නේ අඩු කාලයක් ඇතුළත, right? Because this paper also not very easy. You know, this paper is enterprise risk management, financial risk management. There are calculations and application of risk, a lot of writing. ඒ නිසා පිට්ටු ගණන් ලියන්න ඕනේ නැහැ. දැන් මේ වගේ ප්‍රශ්නයක් දැක්කහම A 5යි, right? ලකුණු 5යි, 5 marks. Actions required to sustain organizational independence of internal audit. Now, you don't need to read the question also initially to see whether you can get 5 marks. Why? Because always, if internal auditors' organizational independence to be established, these things are always valid. Number 1, to whom internal auditors report. So in this first point of reporting, you need to discuss both functional reporting and administrative reporting. Then you will get certainly 1 mark or more. And secondly, internal auditor need to have unrestricted access to people in the organization and any documentation system, etc. So the second point you can discuss on access, right? Unrestricted access. Thirdly, okay, now internal auditor has direct reporting, access, right? Then what internal audit is supposed to do, right, in terms of real work, that is where internal audit mandate come. So internal auditor's mandate means the authority given, the scope, responsibilities. So internal auditor's mandate is usually in internal audit charter. So now when it comes to internal auditor's charter, this is where internal auditor can operate in terms of areas to be covered and so on. That has to be approved by the board or audit committee, right? So with that charter, also some important decision about appointment removal. Now if management doesn't like head of internal audit, sack the guy. No, that's not acceptable. So appointment, removal, performance evaluation of the head of audit, we call is chief internal audit Chief Audit Executive, CAE. I explained to you this in my main session. So the third point being the mandate as well as the Chief Internal Audit Executive's role. Now we have covered three areas, right? Then what is fourth one? What is fifth one? So if you put about 5 areas, marks guaranteed, right? So now the practical area where management can see the word organizational independence. In the organization, if finance director wants to put pressure on internal auditor, cut the budget, cut the bonus, increment, right? Don't let them to spend on softwares and things like that. That's not very important. Now, budget is a very important area. And finally, right, whether internal audit is also comes under the board oversight. So you can summarize under oversight. I'll explain to you. Now, what I wanted to tell you, if you are very sharp in terms of knowledge, even without reading the case study, within a minute when you look at, you know how to get these 5 marks. Now, but then why there is a case study given? Obviously, I need to relate the information in the case study when I write my answer. As a student, you should do that. Now, these 5 points you are writing and bringing some information from the case study and fill in the blanks and getting 5 marks. Simple. So likewise, if you look at part B, that talks about key control. This term key controls are very important. Key control that should be embedded within an anti-corruption policy. Now, the topic is anti-bribery policy, right? Now, this is a famous topic and even your syllabus has a section called compliance, right? So, anti-bribery policy to ensure transparency, consistency and effective management oversight over promotional and hospitality activities of this company. Now, it seems that this company, right, is doing promotional hospitality, you know, giving some benefit, gift to other parties. Then, you know, in Sri Lanka, this law, bribery and corruption. With recent law, previous law was extended to, previous law was applicable only to government sector. The new law is applicable to whom? Even private sector. So I really advise you to watch. I am uploading a special half-an-hour video where you can navigate some critical questions on this anti-bribery action, so which is again connected to your syllabus. Please watch that. That is on the Infinity Think Tank video, right, by our veteran lecturer, right, Miss Tarika, right, who has immense experience in this field. So once we upload that video, please watch. That's on the anti-bribery and corruption. So now you will get more idea, but then again here, if I want to get 10 marks, what is this control? What are these key controls? That revolves around anti-bribery policy. Logically speaking, any policy, right, you can't just leave the policy. Now, what are the policy related controls that you can bring in? If you look at from a governance perspective, here we need to ensure, okay, policy is there, but how do we enforce the policy? To enforce the policy, you need to have authorization limits. If you are doing giving gift or promotion, who can do that? To what level? Who are the authorized people? What are the limits? How those limits are being monitored? The reason why you are giving, is it documented? And whether somebody can audit, right? And there are some cases where you cannot give gift and hospitality, right? Now once the policy is set up, you need to educate and enforce, right? And then finally, you need to monitor through internal audit whether this policy is being followed and reported. Now, what I spoke, you can get 10 marks. Again, I can break what I spoke to point 1, right? That is to ensure that policy related, right? The policy related matters, specifically, you are bringing this policy as a governance mechanism. You are introducing not just as a policy which is in a paper, policy as a, remember keyword, governance mechanism, because through the policy you need to establish, right, authority, who is authorized to give promotion, right, authority, and who is answerable if something go wrong, who is the head, authority, accountability, and oversight. So through the policy, we need to bring authority, accountability, and oversight. And then once the policy is there, how do we establish authorization, controls, and then limits that we need to monitor? And then how do we communicate this and communicate this to employ and enforce the policy is understood, communicated frequently, and enforced if anybody violate the policy, right? And that actions are taken, and we need to document wherever promotional or gift are given, that's documented, rationale is documented, and finally somebody is monitored. Now see, these 6 points, 10 marks. We haven't read the question even. Answer එක දන්නවා, question එක කියවන්න නැතු. මේකත් කලාවක්. මොකද්ද කලාව? Paper එක කියන්න නැතුව උත්තරේ දන්නවා. කොහොමද එහෙම වෙන්නේ? Because the questions are set based on the syllabus learning outcome. If you are very sharp and have the solid knowledge, you know this header is an acceptable answer. Only thing you need to fill the gaps, right? Fill the blanks or fill the balance content by extracting from the case. එච්චර සරලයි වැඩේ. ඉතින් ගොඩාක් worry වෙන්න එපා. Discuss key executive remuneration. For me, what is, while the exam paper is 10 pages, වැදගත්ම ටික මෙන්න මේ පුංචි කැලි ටික. මෙතන selection එකක් කරන්න ඕනේ අපි. We need to go through, right? 3 questions and select 2 also, right? Now I see, oh my goodness, this is 15, very easy. This one, discuss key executive remuneration criteria that board should adopt based on the recognized corporate governance best practice. If you have a corporate governance code, you can bring in to ensure, now this is equitable treatment, equitable remuneration, and aligning with the strategy and long-term value creation objectives. Very good. දැන් මේ උත්තරේ, මේ ප්‍රශ්නය ඇතුළේම උත්තරෙත් තියෙනවා. Discuss the key executive remuneration criteria. So the question itself has given you 2 answers, 2 or 3. කොහොමද? දැන් මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ සරලව කියන්නේ executive remuneration, salary increment, bonus, right? Bonus in kind, cash, right? How do we really decide? It has to be transparent. But this has given the answer. In many corporate collapse, specifically variable remuneration. Now, when it comes to remuneration, fixed and variable. Variable remuneration, if there is temptation, pressure to achieve target, then there is a chance of manipulation is very high. Therefore, it's very important that this variable remuneration is properly governed. How? What is the criteria? The criteria should be, it need to be aligned with the long-term value creation and sustainability. That is one criteria that you have to certainly use, right? And another criteria which is in the answer itself we can find, when you come up with remuneration, you need to make sure that it is equitable. So which means the parity internally, you can't have different subsidiaries or different levels where they have different remunerations, right? So likewise, what are the other best practices in remuneration that we can bring to the answer? Specifically, the remuneration, right? If they are going to get these 2, you can write. The third one being the transparency for you to achieve certain level of bonuses, whether the targets, right, are properly established. Targets or key performance indicators are clearly established. Once you achieve those targets or KPI, right? Now, if you take sustainability, carbon emission, that's not a short-term goal, right? Maybe company will say by 2030 we are achieving net zero. Then how it is connected through the KPIs, right? And then finally, it's very important that this also should come under oversight of remuneration committee that has independent non-executive directors. මේ ටික තමයි ලකුණු 25කට ටක් ගාලා ලියන්න ඕනේ, right? Then likewise, if you go to the next question, දැන් අපි ටක් ගාලා බලන්නේ තෝරා ගැනීමක් මේ කරන්නේ. ඊගාව එක ලොකු කතන්දරයක් තියෙනවා, බට් අගට ගිහින් බලනවා මොනවා ගැනද මේ කියන්නේ කියලා, right? Now, මං කිව්වේ අර මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ නොකියා උත්තර ලියන කලාව. right? මේක තමයි කලාව. මෙතනත් 25ක් තියෙනවා. Evaluate the suitability of pi. Incremental budgeting approach currently used by FDPL in the context of proposed acquisition of HFL and recommend more appropriate budgeting method that would be better support the strategic, financial and risk consideration arising from the acquisition. එතකොට මෙතන කතා කරන්නේ මොන බජට් එකද? Incremental budget. This is the last year how much we have spent on property. We are increasing 10%. Our revenue last year is increased by 20%. Just applying incremental changes to last year budget, you are deriving current year. That won't work because this is an acquisition scenario. When you acquire a new company and when you want to do a budget, you need to really look at what are the strategic implications, the new market share that you will grab. It cannot be derived from last year. And how about the risks? When you take this company, let us say they are very weak, you need to strengthen. Maybe their system is weak, you need to invest in the system, bridge the control gaps, and that may require investment. Therefore, incremental budget won't work. So let's do zero-based budgeting, right? You see, that's the answer. 5 marks. පොඩ්ඩක් ලියවන ලකුණු දෙක තුනක් නිකම්ම ගන්න පුළුවන්. මම කියපු ටික, right? තව හොඳට ගන්න ඕන නම් ලස්සනට explain කරන්න points තුනකින්. Then next. එතකොට දැන් මේ අපි case එක කියෙව්වේ නෑනේ. මේක කියෙව්වොත් තියෙන්නේ යම්කිසි company-යක් they are going to acquire another company. As a part of acquisition, they may discuss several problems. So incremental budgeting won't work if you want to do a budget. Same second one, discuss the data governance and data protection risk identified in this company and explain their significance to the acquisition decision. What is that? Again, if you read the case study, they will talk about some data issue, data leakage, so accessibility issue, all of that. And in Sri Lanka, as we speak, the Data Protection Act is there. So, if they are weak, especially in data, they are also exposed to cyber security risks, right? When it comes to acquisition, it's very important that they need to address this data governance and data protection risk. Right? Why they are significant? One obvious reason, if you are a good company, you are going to acquire another company which is exposed to data protection after the acquisition. If there is a newspaper article, this group has been exposed to a data privacy issue, what is at danger is specifically your reputational risk. That way you can easily write here. Then they ask in evaluate the effectiveness of internal control system. Wow. Using CASriLanka framework. Right, CASriLanka 5 components, golden chance, right? An extent to which reliance can be placed on the system in the context of acquisition, right? To what level we can rely on internal control. Now, here, this 10 marks depends on now CASriLanka, right? This is CASriLanka. How you analyze the 5 components of CASriLanka, right? Which is there to make sure that your operations are effective, your reportings are reliable, and you comply with the law. Starting with the control environment, the culture of the organization, whether board of directors, awareness, action, and attitude regarding controls. Do they consider internal controls are important? And do they have a method of identifying and quantifying risk? For those risks, whether there are adequate controls in terms of authorization, segregation of duties, performance reviews, and so on, including IT, GC, and application control. And then how information system provide reliable information for financial reporting. Specifically, again, IT control, IT general control, and finally, how controls are being monitored. If you explain these 5 in relation to case, you get another 10 marks. Again, then අර ප්‍රශ්නෙට වඩා සමහර අයට මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ ලේසි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. You will select, oh, now already you have decided I'm going to answer both of these questions. Good. And then we'll come to the last selection, whether it is a good selection. Again, අපි මෙච්චර කතන්දර කියන්නේ we want to go and see what the examiner is asking. Do I have the knowledge to quickly answer this question? Okay, the questions are evaluate 4 steps that an external auditor of Serendip would take to comply with laws and regulation. 4 steps external auditor will take. Now, when you go through external auditing standard, right now, this is not auditing paper, but logically speaking, if external auditor wants to identify laws and regulation, the first step is external audit should understand you. What are the laws and regulations that are applicable to this particular industry? You, right? Through that understanding, external auditor will see whether company has designed and implemented controls to ensure those laws and regulations are complied with. And then if there are such laws, controls, for example, there is a legal officer, they have compiled laws, they are monitoring then the external auditor will test. In addition, another best party, right, another person you can really, external auditor can rely on is internal audit. So these are the answers, right? You can answer this question easily. Advise how finance team can support the external auditor with the process by providing 2 points. Citing case facts. Here, you need to read the case. But generally speaking, how finance team supports? By providing the relevant information that you have internally on this, supporting them, clarifying them. So that's again easy, right? 2 points, but here you need to relate to case study factors. Recommend 3 audit evidence. This is like looking from audit lens to support the internal audit findings. To support the internal audit findings of Serendip on control, effectiveness, and risk management. That we need to read the case study and see. Developed a reporting framework, reporting structure. So, reporting framework or a structure for audit committee of Serendip, including mechanism to track remediation progress. So something to do with audit committee structure, right? And then 3 ethical issues in the scenario. Each issue analyzed into related risk and recommendation, right? So 3 ethical issues you have to give, right? 2 risks and 2 recommendation. Maybe you can tabular format. But now, generally speaking, this question talks about little bit of auditing, the external auditor, how they are going to gather, audit evidence, and then something to do with structure and ethics. You might say, oh, මේක නම් ටිකක් බර වැඩි වගේ. හැබැයි බර වැඩි නෑ, අපි මේක බලද්දි හරි ලේසි. All 3 questions are easy, students. But then you may find that the first 2 questions are easy and you may want to do that. Anyway, we will do all 3. So I think that gives you the confidence that these questions are not difficult, right? Nothing is difficult if you are prepared well. So that's our task. So now we'll go to the questions and try to answer this, and I'm building your confidence, students. So remember then ඔයාලට මේකේ suggested answers අරන් කියවන්න පුළුවන්. ඕන දෙයක් කරන්න පුළුවන්. හැබැයි වැදගත් දේ case study එකක් බලලා අපේ framework එක ඔළුවේ තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒක තිබුණොත් ටක් ටක් ගාලා case study facts ටික දාන්න තියෙන. ඒ දාද්දී ඔයාගේ answer එකයි suggested answer එකයි 100% align වෙන්න අවශ්‍ය නැත. As long as you give logical points, that your answer is acceptable. And that's the confidence that I want to build here. So now we will start with this particular questions. Then අපි කියවමු ඇයි අපි කියවන්නේ මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ කොහොමද. So not this, the first one, right? Now in this question, right, how do we මේ already framework එකත් අපි දාගෙන තියෙන්නේ. Organizational independence. දැන් case study එක කියවද්දී අපි බලන්න ඕනේ මොනවාද මේ organizational independence වලට බලපාන සාධක. Reporting ගැන මොකද කියන්නේ, mandate එක ගැන, chart එක ගැන, budget එක ගැන. So those information we will quickly gather and put under these buckets and get those marks. And also we will see anti-bribery, what is given, remuneration. Now with that, we will quickly read. And remuneration is only this paragraph, right? So then the balance should be on the other two. Here promotional expenditure must be on the anti-bribery policy. Then balance should be on internal audit. Yeah. So the question also broken to those three. So now B&G Food is a large manufacturing and trading group operating in Sri Lanka, primarily engaged in production, distribution, and confectionery beverage. Right? It's a trading group. So they operate in confectionery and beverage. As a part of the strategy to consolidate operation and support future growth, right? The board has approved plan for the company to seek a public listing with next financial year. In this context, management has finalized the consolidated annual budget and table at the board meeting. So they are preparing, they are going to be listed. This is a valuable information, right? Because when we talk about audit committee, remuneration committee, all of that is really relevant because the listing rule requires you to have them. So this is a keyword. And they are now doing the consolidated budget. During the deliberation, several governance and compliance issues are noted. The first thing is internal audit budget. So this section is on internal audit. අපි පහක් හදාගත්තා මේ පහට ගැලපෙන ටික මේකෙන් ටක් ටක් ගාලා ගමු. The board noted that internal audit budget has increased in proportion. Now they are talking about the internal audit budget. Budget has increased, right? Compared to the annual audit plan, reflecting financial resources required to execute audits across key operational and support function. While recognizing the importance of well-resourced internal audit activity, directors emphasize that organizational independence of audit critical, particularly in light of planned listing and increased expectation of external stakeholders. So they are actually telling they are looking internal auditors budget. We need resources, but they also acknowledge that organizational independence of internal audit is important. Good. Accordingly, board requested the chief internal auditor to submit a paper at the next meeting outline the actions required to effectively achieve sustained organizational independence. Very good. එතකොට දැන් මේ උත්තරේ ලියන්න ගොඩක් facts case study එකේ නැහැ. Question එකේ තියෙන එකම තමයි case එක ඇතුලේ තියෙන්නේ. You have to write a paper with the 5 points we noted. Organizational independence එක achieve වෙන්නේ කොහොමද? හැබැයි අපි ඉතුරු ටිකත් කියවලා බලමු whether there are any other information about the external auditor's independence, right? Sorry, internal auditor. Promotional expenditure. Board also observed that promotional expenditure budget has increased approximately by 25% compared to the previous year. Chief Marketing Officer explained that the increase relating to the structured program of annual events, including entertainment. These are the events. Entertainment, dining, sporting occasions attending, offered to long-standing business partners, right? Now, this is offered to long-standing business partners across the supply chain as a part of relationship building initiative. Remember the new Bribery and Corruption Act? I told you you had to watch that video. I am uploading in the same course. If anyone is offering a bribe, gift, or taking a bribe to influence somebody's decision, that is considered as corruption, right? Against the law. So then we need to be careful about what are these entertainment offered. While acknowledging there is a commercial rationale, board expressed concern regarding the potential bribery, inducements can influence karana, right? Conflict of interest associated with such hospitality. Directors advise management to draft a formal anti-bribery policy to ensure transparency, consistency, and appropriate oversight of all promotional. So, ඒකයි අර යට තියෙන්නේ policy එක ගැන. So now we can actually, we already discussed what need to be included in that answer as well. Then the last, ඇත්තටම දැන් case study එකේ ගොඩක් information නැහැ. හැම ප්‍රශ්න ගැනම පුංචි paragraph එකක් තියෙනවා එච්චරයි. Last one, executive remuneration and governance. In considering HR remuneration budget, the board emphasized that executive remuneration should be equitable, transparent, and aligned with the company's strategy and long-term. මේකම දීලා තියෙනවා ප්‍රශ්නය. Aligned with the strategy and long-term objective, that's one of the criteria. Given the company's intention to pursue a listing, right, noted that strengthening governance framework underpinning executive remuneration is very important. The board advised management to identify and articulate remuneration guidelines grounded in the recognized governance best practices that would ensure alignment between executive rewards, the interest of wider workforce, and the company's strategic purpose. So this all three, then මං ඔයාලා ප්‍රශ්නේ මීට කලින් අපි මේ case study එක කියවන්න නැතුව උත්තරේත් ලියාගත්තා. මේ පැත්තෙත් ලියලා දෙනවා, මේ පැත්තෙත් ලියලා ඔක්කොම ලිව්වා. දැන් case study එක කියවුවා කියලා ලොකු දෙයක් හම්බුනේත් නැහැ, right? Because this case study straight gives you the problem and then asking if you have the framework you can write. Okay, let's write the answer. The first thing is what actions are required? See, assess the action. We need to write actions required to achieve and sustain internal auditors' independence. Here, reporting, right? Authority, charter, mandate, all of that I have given. Case study එකෙන් ගන්න පුළුවන් අර යාලා බජට් එක ගැන කතා කරන කතන්දරේ විතරයි. නේ බජට් එකක් ගැන කියනවා. That's the part you can take. But the rest you can easily write based on what we wrote here. So, in that way, if you go to the point, actions required to enhance or sustain internal auditors' independence. දැන් උත්තරයක් ලියන එක හරිම ලේසි, right? Because we need to first structure the answer. The first point, 5 marks, point පහක් ලිවන හොඳටම ඇති. So the first thing you need to ensure reporting in the organization. Please write reporting. So what are we going to write here? To ensure independence, the Chief Internal Audit Executive, CIE, මේ වචනේ තමයි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් use කරන්නේ. Chief Audit Executive, CAE, right? Should functionally report to the board or audit committee, right? Because then management cannot interfere with, if you want, because the management cannot interfere with reporting, direct reporting, and it also gives that power, authority, right? So the key word is functionally, right? Administratively, Chief Internal Auditor, Chief Audit Executive again should report to the highest level of the organization, right? Should report to the highest level of the organization, right? Where internal audit function කියන්නේ මුළු department එකම කියන අදහසින්, right? Where internal audit function can get the required support for day-to-day activities, right? They need resources, they need access, administrative, and the internal auditor කොහේ හරි යන්න යද්දි, no, don't go there, don't disturb them. ඒව නෑ. You inform now. Ideally, let us say you are administratively reporting to managing director, MD, the highest level, or CEO. The CFO to report කරොත් කකුලෙන් අදින්න පුළුවන්, right? The highest level එකට report කරාම day to day activities බොහොම smooth විදිහට යන්න පුළුවන්. කවුරුත් බාධා දාන්න නැහැ, right? Can get the required support for day to day activities. Simple. Either functionally report කරනවා කියන්නේ, if internal auditor giving any reports, right, work wise, function, now what is the scope of this engagement, whether we are adding this or not adding, what type of audits we are going to do, all that functional decisions are directly coming from the board audit committee, practically audit committee. ඉතින් මේක ලිව්වා reporting කියලා අපි කතා කරේ ඕක number 1. Number 2, I spoke about mandate. නෑ තව ලේසි එකක් ගමුකෝ unrestricted access කියන එක බොහොම ලේසි, right? But that also comes from the mandate. So මම mandate එක යටතේ point දෙකක් කියන්න. Point දෙකක් හැටියට ලියන්න පුළුවන්. When I discuss internal audit 5 domains with you based on latest IIA standards in one video, I covered all of this. There we discuss what is internal auditor's mandate, right? So under internal auditor's mandate, one thing you can write unrestricted access. Internal auditor should have unrestricted access to people, anybody, irrespective of their position, right? People records, right? Which enable internal auditor to discharge internal auditor's duty properly. Then the third one that you can write under mandate, or second point, overall we are writing the third point, that decision relating to especially internal audit head, who can remove internal audit head, who can appoint, who can decide the remuneration performance, that you should not allow management to do. Again, it should come under board audit committee, under internal auditor's mandate, right? So specifically decision relating to what? Appointment, removal, right? Performance evaluation of internal audit, right, should be decided by the board or the audit committee. The board audit committee, right? So that's the third point. And then we also report in mandate, we wrote 2 points about the access and the decision. And then fourth, another important point that we discussed was what? Oversight we discussed. Now one thing, budget. Because there is specific budget or resources, you can, if you want to use, you can use the word budget or resources. Budget or resources. Because this case study specifically speak about the internal auditor's budget has increased. So you can write that a case එකේ මොන හරි ගත්තොත් හොඳයි නේද, right? The case states about internal auditor's budget and resources required. So what? So what you need to say, right? The budget required, budget means resources, no. Budget required to support internal audit plan, should be authorized by the board, not by the CFO or CEO. There's a greater chance of cutting the budget. Authorized by the board as a whole, right? And ideally, the audit committee recommendation that even the board says this is cybersecurity audits are not required, don't pay for consultant, but the audit committee will recommend, take it up with the chairman and the board, look here, the organization is exposed to this risk, it's very important that we do it, right? And then the fifth point that we can write is oversight. Internal audit to be effective, internal audit should come under oversight of the audit committee. Audit committee should provide the oversight. Oversight එකක් දෙනවා කියන්නේ නිකන් internal auditor පැත්තකට දාලා තියන නැතුව එයාලගෙන හොයලා බලන්න ඕනේ, right? The audit committee can provide the oversight. Audit committee can provide the oversight specifically on in what areas, right? Provide the oversight on. Now, what are the areas? So, හොයලා බලන්න ඕනේ මොනවද? Right? Sorry, සමහර අකුරු වැරදිට ලියවෙනවා, right? So, oversight. Yeah. Oversight. So which area should come under audit committee oversight? Specifically, approval of the plan, internal audit plan, what areas you are going to check, right? And then performance evaluation, whether internal auditors are doing a great job. And then audit findings. What type of now frauds that are detected by the internal auditor? Findings are there. What is the management response given? Right? Whether corrective actions have been taken. This. ඉතින් ඔය ලකුණු ටික ටක් ගාලා අපිට හම්බුණා. So the part 5 marks, right? Then we are going to the next part of the question. If you remember, that talks about develop key control that should be embedded within anti-bribery policy. Then policy එක ගැන කතා කරලා policy එකට අදාළ controls, right? So then if you write those points, already we discussed මෙතන ලියලා තියෙන ඒ ටික. So first thing I told, the policy should not be a mere document. Policy should activate the governance process. Remember, technically, or a control එකයි governance process එකයි කියන්නේ දෙකක්. I explained in my internal audit lecture, control is a control, maybe authorization, segregation, but governance process means a much bigger thing. Who is governing this whole thing? How to govern? The governing කියපු ගමන් දෙකක් එන්න ඕනේ, right? Processes and structures connect කරාම තමයි governance process එකක් එන්නේ. Governance process එකක් හදනවා කියන්නේ මේ policy එක monitor කරන්න structure එකක් තියෙන්න ඕනේ. board එකේ කවුද ඒක කරන්නේ? කරන ක්‍රමවේදය මොකක්ද? ওই දෙකම එකතු වුණාම මේකට කියන්නේ governance process එකක් කියලා. ඒතර control සහ governance process කියන්නේ දෙකක්. That you need to understand, right? So now the first point you should write is that the policy has to be embedded to the governance structure and should be seen as a governance mechanism as opposed to a procedural thing. Once you do that, you can then introduce to activate my policy එක වැඩ කරන්න ඕන නම් organization එකේ promotional දැන් මේ entertainment promotion gift දෙන ඒවා මේවා කරන්න පුළුවන් කාටද පොඩි බට්ටොන්ටද ලොකු අයටද, right? So in the organization there are certain level of authority, right, who will decide that they can decide that this entertainment is okay. So the authority levels are established, and under those authority, this is the CEO. Then you can define thresholds, that this is where we can give, introducing thresholds, the monitoring limits, right? See, may api policy එක ගැන කතා කරා, authorization control ගැන කතා කරා, limits ගැන කතා කරා. ඊට පස්සේ policy එක මේ අවස්ථාවලදී තමයි promotional activities කරන්න පුළුවන්. Policy has to explain. Then if you use inappropriately to bribe එකක් වගේ දෙනවා, ලොකු gift එකක් දෙනවා. gift එක කියලා car එකක් දෙනවා to get a contract. That is to induce somebody. That violate the law in Sri Lanka, specifically bribery in private sector, and directors are held accountable. So one of the thing in Sri Lanka Act says the directors should actually communicate and take some measures where they discourage bribery and corruption. If directors haven't done that, and they may be held accountable. That's about the Sri Lanka law. You need to understand this law. That is why there is a video uploaded. Please watch it on the bribery and corruption, right? So just half an hour, watch that. So now, communication of this policy, sign off. Maybe if employee every year they sign off that this policy, gift policy, I have understood. And if policy is deviated, the company can take action, communication and enforcement. And then whenever you give promotion, you need to document why it is given, limits, everything. It was oversight. මේ policy එක මේ promotional budget, who has approved, where it is given, whether it is according to policy, you need to audit and report to the board. එච්චරයි සරලයි. ඒතකොට දැන් උත්තරේ ලියන්න ඕනද මං තව පාරක් කිව්වා. දැන් අපි මේ ටික ලිව්වේ case study එක බලන්න නැතුව. බැලුවා කියලා අපිට අලුතෙන් හම්බුනේ මේ කම්පැනි කියන මේ යාලා කතා කරන promotional activities, entertainment කියලා පොඩ්ඩක් තියෙනවා. That's all we are adding. So answer this 10 marks also so easy. This is how you write that. Let's do that. නේ. ඔයාලට ලියන තාක්කල් පොඩ්ඩක් මදි වගේ තේරෙනවනේ නැත. ඇත්තටම මේවා ලියන්න ඕනේ. See, the way I like to teach, you get a blank piece of paper. එතකොට මට උත්තර ලියනවා කියන්නේ කේස් එක බලපු ගමන් මේ headings ටිකක් ලියා ගන්නවා. ටක් 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 ටක්. and ටක් ගහලා උත්තර ඇදලා උඩට දානවා. ඒක තමයි ආර්ට් එක. So you believe me, I am talking with 2 years of experience. No, තව බින්දුවක් දාගන්න. Right. So therefore, you need to have the courage, but බොරු කරන්න බෑ. Fundamentals, you need to be brilliant. Then writing and scoring is nothing. You can be the prize winner if you are very smart. Right. And this is a very useful paper. Right. Advanced risk management, financial risk management, corporate governance, compliance, internal audit, all in one. Ethics. Right. So, what are the answers that we will write? Let's do that. So the first thing is we need to understand, right? Establish the policy. Establish the policy. Policy කිව්වහම නම ලියන්න bribery and corruption policy. BB කියලා ලියන්නම් මේ කාලේ ඉතුරු කරන්න ඕනේ. Bribery and corruption policy. Anti-bribery, anti-bribery, AB policy, anti-bribery policy as a governance mechanism. As a governance process. එමෙන්නද governance process කිව්වත් හරිය. මම explain කරා governance process කියන්නේ මොකක්ද කියලා. Governance process. This will enable right, this will enable to do what? This will enable to identify, or again I establish to identify what? Specifically the authority who is authorized to do that. If something goes wrong, who is answerable? Accountability. Right? කවුද මේ ගැන හොයලා බලන්නේ? Oversight. ඔය ඔක්කොම ටික මේක ඇතුලේ තියෙනවා. ඒතර ඒක තමයි policy governance process එකක් හැටියට establish කරනවා. දෙක, introduce. What is the next one? I am writing in separate color. Authorization, right? Authorization levels for different මොනවාද මේ කේස් එකේ කියන වචන දැන් ලියන්න ඕනේ, right? Different promotional activities, right? And then there you will identify different type, right? Different types of things. මේ වට මෙයාගෙන් authorized. Then entertainment event එකක් තිබුණොත් so and so gift දෙනවා නම් මෙයාගෙන්, right? The value, the nature value, all of that. Now, once those are established, under each of these authorization level, you need to introduce limits. Maximum limit is this, or another word, thresholds, right, for monitoring purpose. right? Next is very important now policy එකක් තියාගෙන ලාච්චුවේ දැම්මට වැඩක් නැහැනේ නේද? Enforcement community ඉස්සලාම මේක හැමෝටම එන කම්පැනිට අලුතෙන් එන හැම කෙනෙක්ම communicate induction program එකේදී අපිට මේක කතා කරන්න පුළුවන්. සේවකයෙක් අලුතෙන් ගෙන ආපුවම periodic letters යවන්න පුළුවන්, annual declaration එකක් දාන්න පුළුවන්. Communication. How do we communicate to employees? And if anybody violate, how do you enforcement, right? So ඒකවට ලියන්න පුළුවන් how policy is being communicated to employees. Is it through induction? Is it through training program? Is it through declaration? Please write put it there. Enforcement කියන්නේ actions. For example, enforcement action can be disciplinary action, right? Disciplinary actions to be taken. පහ. තව මොනවද අපි කතා කරේ? Oversight ගැන කතා කරනවා. ඔය පහ ලිව්වා නම් කෙලින්ම ලකුණු 10 අතේ. The oversight yeah. මම oversight එකට කලින් තව එකක් කතා කරා. මේවා හැම වෙලේම document කරන එක වැදගත්, right? You can anybody ask, say audit or anybody, there is a general ledger. Let us say 5 million payments, something. The auditor is asking no documents given CFO has approved. Even CFO can't remember what this is given. He is wondering what answer should I give. To avoid that, you need to document, right? For each major types of promotional activities or entertainment, the key word is what is the business rationale, so that it's seen as something that makes sense from business, something that has a business sense. Business rationale need to be documented, right? And then who authorized all of that, there is a document. The final one is very important, and that is the oversight. Oversight කිව්වහම the idea is to monitor, right? මේ තමයි internal audit and audit committee. To monitor if policy is being followed. How to do that? Through periodical audit, through periodic audits, and report in non-compliance to the board and audit committee. Report in NCs to board or audit committee. That's it. Right. So let's go to the last part of the answer. Again, in the question paper, there was only one paragraph explaining on this. If I show you that again, this one, sorry, this is the paragraph in relation to the remuneration. This is all they have said. In considering HR remuneration budget, board emphasizes remuneration equitable, aligned with the strategy long-term objective, and they are going to be listed, and they need to strengthen the governance framework around remuneration, right? So remuneration guideline, right? That ensure alignment between rewards, right, and the interest of wider workforce and company's strategic purpose, right? Company strategic purpose. So now the question, if you go to discuss key executive remuneration criteria that the board should adopt. based on the corporate governance. Now, when you write this answer, students, you can also refer to the corporate governance guide, but stay with the basic facts, which is also emphasized in the question itself, right? It should be aligned with the board strategy and long-term value, because very often what happens is the remuneration is short-term. It encourages short-term behavior. So one fundamental criteria is remuneration should be aligned to company's long-term value creation and strategy. That is a good way to start our answer. And then it has to be equitable, where the remuneration is internally there is consistency, there is no bias. And also you can verify externally whether remuneration is adequate to retain key people, attract and retain key people. Like salary, remuneration, and research can be done. And specifically what we spoke earlier, the variable remuneration should be structured to ensure that you avoid, while you are motivating people, you should avoid aggressive risk taking. That's where a long-term care. So then you may not just give an annual profit bonus, you may want to give what? Share ownership scheme based on the achievement of long-term objective. ඔයාගේ practical දේවල්ට ඒකුත් උත්තරය ඇතුළට ගේන්න. Right? And then if there are any manipulations, right, you may also have provision to reverse. That's where the responsiveness of the policy comes. You are able to reverse if criteria is not met, outcome not met. So likewise, you can easily write some logical answer. So we will write that answer as well now on the, last point, last part C. That is actually to write the executive remuneration criteria, right? C. Executive remuneration. So what are the points we discussed? The first one, remuneration, right, and its components, including its components, should be aligned to, the key word is that, should be aligned to long-term value creation strategies, rather than focusing on short-term goal. Short-term goal. Example, short-term goal is a profit. Long-term, you can have more strategic objectives, achievement of strategic objectives, right? So how do you balance short-term and long-term horizon? Another important things which I emphasize, the equity, right? So the remuneration, the equity part specifically, so we called it equity and proportionality. For example, now some people are really working hard and taking more risks in that job description and bringing more money to the company. So should you look at that when you structure the remuneration, the proportionality, right? The equity. So that basically you need to check the internal pay structures. Internal pay structure, ensure parity, right, and takes into account the level of effort, risk, So then accordingly you decide. And then another thing is, if you want to industry benchmarking, that is outside the industry benchmark, outside the organization is done, and making required adjustment. Why you are doing that? To even to attract new talent as well as retain talents. Then what are the other important remuneration criteria? Right. Now here also you can write about what we discussed, the share ownership scheme, right? If you want to encourage more of long-term behavior. Then another very important thing is that independent oversight. That's where the Remuneration Committee and Corporate Governance Code comes. Independent oversight, especially if the company is going to be listed, it's mentioned in the case study they are going to be listed, then it's advised to have a remuneration committee totally consist of non-executive directors, right, non-executive directors the majority, right, or at least two should be independent non-executive directors, right, and who will actually recommend to the board about the remuneration requirements. And in addition, you may also see how responsive this policy, if there is a mismatch, the accountability, right? Responsiveness. Like I said, if it is not driving the outcome, can you reverse it, right? So if the criteria are not met, the right, if criteria are not met, what are the provisions available to reverse? Now, if you look at things like Sarbanes-Oxley Act, now see, during Enron's time, the bonuses are paid from inflated profit. But then Act says subsequently, if there are prior adjustment, the bonus need to be returned, right? Likewise. So those are the basic things, and you don't need to write a lot for you to get that marks, right? Very simple, right? Simple and short. So that question we easily answer. And then when you look at the next part of the question, I mean that question easily 25. I told you these two questions you can easily answer, right? And this question talks about what we spoke earlier. If I again refresh your memory, what we need to cover in this question, incremental budgeting not I said make ප්‍රශ්නේ ඇතුළෙම උත්තරේ තියෙනවා. Data governance and data protection risk they talk about, and the CASriLanka framework. So another very easy questions. Now let us see, to answer these questions, what are the internal information that we can gather from the case study itself, right? So going to the case, what information is required to answer these three questions about the zero-based budgeting versus incremental budgeting, data protection risk, right? Because one part of the question they ask about the regarding Data Protection Act, discuss the data governance and data protection risk, right? So specifically, what are those risk elements, and then the CASriLanka framework, right? Now here, when you look at it, this is a bank. Wow, the moment you say bank, the risk becomes really significant, right? So now when it comes to risk in a bank, number one is bank is highly regulated. So the regulatory risk penalties comes, that's the more of a compliance risk for a bank, specifically for data. And the other thing is, if there is, because data risk, all of that connects to cyber. If somebody hack, right? That can disrupt banking operation. The disruption we discuss in risk management, right? That is a more of operational risk. And then most importantly, you need to discuss what? Reputational damage, which I already discussed in the questions, right? So now in these questions also you need to cover, right? Yeah, now here not only discuss the data governance and data protection risk of this HFL, the significance of their explain their significance to the acquisition decision. When you acquire, why this is going to be significant. Now let's read the case study facts, right? The finance FDPL is a listed company. That's the key information. With an island-wide branch network, the company provides lending, leasing, microfinance, factoring to retail and SME as a part of medium and near-term expansion strategy. Board is considering the acquisition of NBFI, right? Another non-banking, that is HFL, Heritage Finance Limited, subject to due diligence. So this is acquisition. So the question deals with this acquisition. In parallel with the acquisition, they are preparing the company is doing a budget for the next financial year. Historically, company has relied on incremental budgeting using the prior figures as the baseline with limited reassessment of, this is the keyword, limited reassessment of underlying cost structure. Given the potential acquisition, CFO has advised that suitability of the current budget approach should be reconsidered to ensure alignment with what? Strategic, financial and risk implication of the transaction. දැන් මේ පැරා එක ඇතුළේම අපිට ලියන්න ඕනේ උත්තරේ තියෙනවා. incremental budget එක හරියන්නේ නැහැ. මේ acquisition එක ගද්දි cost structure එක වෙනස් වෙනවා. මේ ගත්තේ කම්පැනියට maintain කරන්න එයාලගේ inefficiency වැඩි නම් you have to spend more money. You need to assess that. Similarly, if there are financial and operational risks, you need to put money, right, to correct them. ඒතර ඒ උත්තරේ බොහොම clear, right? උත්තරේ මේක ඇතුළේම තියෙනවා. As a part of acquisition, external advisory firm conducting a due diligence review, the review identifies several concerns relating to data governance and data protection. Here, data governance and data protection policy that defines data classification level. These classifications are not effectively implemented. There are issues identify කරනවා. එකක් තමයි එක කියලා මම දාගත්තා. Classifications are not implemented. Why? No formal data classification tool. So data classify කරේ නැහැ කියන්නේ මේක risk එකක් තමයි. Sensitive information can be leaked. Business sensitive information. එක, employees are permitted unrestricted access to දෙක. Unrestricted access to unofficial cloud storage, say Google Drive. Such as here given Google Drive, Dropbox, which are used for storing and sharing documents externally. So greater chance of sharing information. And in the virus attack, company does not have a formal, third point, they don't have a formal data breach identification and response. That's a big point. Now when there is a data breach, how do they formally identify? Not given. The response mechanism is also not given. Right? And then most importantly, they haven't done VA and VAPT. VAPT කියපු ගම vulnerability assessment and penetration testing not done in the core structure or even the cloud environment or application that are sensitive to customer data. There is a high risk of cyber attack. Cyber security risk is enhanced because when you do a vulnerability assessment, you will identify this server, right? This location can be easily attacked through vulnerability and penetration testing. If that is not done, the vulnerability areas are not identified and appropriate controls have not been brought in to strengthen. So that's a major weakness. එතකොට මේක ඇතුලේ මේ හතර ඔයාලගේ උත්තරයට ගේන්න ඕනේ. දැන් අර සයිබර් එක ගැන කතා කරද්දී you can bring this, right? So these non-compliance, especially data protection can be a compliance risk, and operationally, specifically, දැන් මෙන්න මේ හතරවෙනි එක අපිට දාන්න පුළුවන් මේ කෑල්ල දාන්න පුළුවන් operational risk එකක් හැටියට, right? මොකද කවුරු හරි වෙලා attack කරපු ගමන් operation. Now we learn operational risk, right? Now what is the enterprise risk management definition for operational risk? The risk arising from inadequate people, process or system. Because of that, you say suddenly you can't access to your server, you can't run any file, right? So you can't operate. You can't withdraw money, ATM system has been hacked. So this is operational risk. Likewise, if there is a sensitive data going outside, that can be a regulatory risk as well as reputational risk. That's how you need to connect, right? So specifically, this company, they say unrestricted use of official storage and lack of formal response to all of that is a non-compliance with data protection requirements, specifically for banking sector. Then the due diligence report also highlight weaknesses in internal control system. මේකේ CASO framework එකක් test කරනවා. ඒකට ඕනෙ ටිකක් මේකේ ඇති. Internal control system and operational process. Company has several key controls, right? Several key controls within the lending operation and system access management are found to be inadequately designed and inconsistently applied. So that's the weakness. Instead of manual override were observed without sufficient documentation, right? Or independent review. So you have a question about control, environment, the culture where the board is responsible. Specifically this, accountability for ownership at the senior management level. මේ කෑල්ල එහෙමම ගන්න පුළුවන් මම රතු පාටින් දාන්න. මේ කෑල්ල කියන්නේ control environment. දැන් ඒකත් skill එකක්. Now if you look at this particular part talking about the control, right? Internal මෙතන specifically කියන්නේ the several key controls lending operation system are inadequately designed. So make අපිට CASO framework එකේ control activities යටතේ ලියන්න පුළුවන්. Then specifically this part, control ownership at the senior management level was unclear, right? And key KPIs are primarily focused on growth, and that is a key question about the control environment. The control culture is not there, right? And then third part මේක හැල්ලෙන් කතා කරනවා risk management ගැන. course එකේ තුන්වෙනි එක. While the company had documented the risk assessment practices, right, and the applicable central bank direction, monitoring activities are weak. So now risk management guideline තිබුණාට is it really embedded to the operation and decision making is a question that you can write. And then monitoring activities are weak with delays in following up internal audit recommendation and no structured mechanism, right? And to independently verify the effectiveness implementation of corrective action plan. This is totally the monitoring piece of the CASO framework. Management has responded to the due diligence finding by stating that the identified weaknesses are largely procedural in nature and that existing internal control is adequate. So now see that view of management, they are blind management. The board is required to consider these matters carefully in evaluating whether the proposed acquisition should be proceeded, the extent of reliance that can be placed on the internal control. Can you rely? No. That also examiner has asked in the question whether you are able to rely on this, right? And specifically then CASO framework එකේ පහක් තිබුණාට අපිට ගොඩාක් evidence මෙතන තියෙනවා. control environment එක ගැන කතා කරන්න පුළුවන්, control activities, monitoring and the risk assessment. Very easily දැන් මේ paragraph එකේ framework එක දන්නවා නම් මේ ඇදලා මේ ටික ගන්න විතරයි තියෙන්නේ. So easy ළමයි. Right? So then we can actually answer all three. That's all, no, the question? Yeah. So that's why I said that question is a very easy question. මොකද question එක ඇතුලේ උත්තර ටික ඔක්කොම තියෙනවා, right? So now, but then you need to have some expertise in bit of risk management as well, because see, discuss the data governance and data protection risk. මෙතන plural නේ තියෙන risk. The risk කියවපුවාම අපේ risk universe එක ඔයාලගේ ඔළුවට එන්න ඕනේ. risk universe. Even in the CASO ERM we discuss See, strategic risks, right? Financial reporting compliance. But in relation to this case study, what is your risk universe? The categorization, right? The categorization is that we said strategic element here is a more of a reputational risk, right? And then the operational risk. If cyber attack disrupt in your operation, you can't operate. That's a more of a disruptive risk and reputational risk. So why this is important? Because specifically you have to justify from the acquisition point of view, there are a lot of hidden risk in this company, right? And then if something happens, because you are going to integrate this system, data, customers all are integrated to your system, then if something happens, right, the company's reputation, company's risk profile will go up, and then actually the overall organizational reputation is tarnished, right? Therefore, you need to invest, right, in the data governance, the penetration testing required. That is why that incremental budget also won't work, right? So now you can easily see what are the answers that we will write on these three questions. So the උත්තරේ දැනටමත් අපි ලියලා කතා කරලා ඉවරයි. Again, to satisfy you that writing also not a trouble, very easy, right? The bullet points, everything with clarity. ගොඩක් කතන්දර ලියන්න නැතුව අවශ්‍ය දේ ලියන්න ඕනේ, right? So there are students, if you look at the first part that we need to write is about the risks, no? What are the data protection and no. The first part is incremental budgeting, right? Evaluate the suitability of incremental budgeting, right? And then recommend a more appropriate budgeting that would this sarala uttarē thamai zero based budgeting, right? Because you need to look at from a zero based context, right? So what you need to write, so simply the answer to first question, that incremental approach incremental budget approach is not appropriate as the acquisition is a significant strategic decision that could influence what? The cost structure, existing cost structure, and resources, more than resources, you can say investment may be required to address identified, due diligence has been already done, identified gaps in internal controls, as well as to mitigate risk. For example, you may need to pay for consultants to do vulnerability assessment and VAPT, penetration testing. So that is not budgeted, right? Therefore, right, zero-based approach is more suitable considering what? Financial, operational, right, and integrations, right, financial, operational and integration requirements, right, which is given in the case study, right? financial operational integration requirement with the acquisition. So something like that, because it's a 5 marks question, you don't need to write pages on this answer, right? So yeah. So that is on the first part. Then when you look at it, part B, data protection risk, right? Let's go to another page. Now, how do you write that? The case study information I told you, they are asking two things in this question you need to really see if you want to get 10 marks. Discuss the data governance and data protection risk identified at HFC, right? And explain the significance, why those risks are significant to FDPL acquisition. So the first is a risk identification, and I told you the bucketing risks. So what are the buckets that you can identify? Being a finance company, the main risk is regulatory and compliance. So what are the points you can write here? And then the next major risk that we discussed was operational risk, right? Specifically due to cyber. Why? What information you can bring from the case study? The other major risk, which is of strategic nature, is reputational risk. In addition, to get the full marks, we need to write, because the same question requires you to write, right, significance of this risk. You need to emphasize the significance. Automatically, you can get another 10 marks, right? That is 10 marks. So out of the questions, right, the regulatory risk, you need to emphasize the fact that this company is a highly regulated company. Now, how do you explain the regulatory risks? Being a non-bank finance institution, right? Specifically, what information from the case study, right? Now, one sensitive risk area for regulatory thing is data protection. By law, it is required to protect customer data, and in a banking sector, this is very sensitive. So the case study says what information we can extract from the case study to really bridge. That's why I said fill in the blank from the question. Now when you read the case study, it specifically talks, අපි ලිව්වනේ the question 1 2 3 4 කියලා. දැන් මට ආයෙ මෙතන ගිහිල්ලා පෙන්නුවොත් මෙන්න මේ ටික තමයි ලියන්න ඕනේ. මේ කේස් එකේ අපි ලිව්වා 1 2 3 4 කියලා මේ ඔන්න ඔය ටික. There is no effective data class, no formal data classification process, unrestricted access to the cloud, unofficial cloud. Third one, formal data breaches identification. There is no formal data breach identification and response. ඔය තුනම ලියන්න පුළුවන් regulatory risk යටතේ. හරිම ලේසි, right? So මොනවාද ලියන තුන? Right? The first one being, right, being a finance, being a non-bank financial institution, right, data, customer data protection is a critical area from regulatory compliance perspective. Specifically, case study says 1 2 3 these weaknesses are prevalent. No formal data classification process, no formal data classification process, what else? Unofficial access to Google Drive, unofficial cloud data where the sensitive information can be stolen even, right? Stored. Thirdly, right, no policy on data breaches, right? So the third one, formal breach identification and response. No formal data breach response. So therefore, this leads to, right, sanctions, regulatory sanctions, supervisory actions. The banks, non-bank supervision division is there when they do audit. If they come across, that's really not good. The other area specifically, remember cyber එකත් එක්ක එන ලොකුම ඊගා දැන් මේ ඇවිල්ලා regulation risk. ඊට පස්සේ bank එක දුවන්න බෑ. If there is a major attack, the systems are down. Right? The hacker wants ransom. So that is operational, specifically because of the now how they are exposed to cyber risk in this case study is about given the higher exposure to the third party applications outside, the cyber risk is very high. In that context, the basic control required is VAPT. The VAPT, cyber risk is high, VAPT is not done. The high risk of cyber attacks, meaning the bank operation can be disrupted. That's all what you are going to write. So that can actually result in significant data leakage, right? Unauthorized access and system disruption. So what you need to write here, you don't need to rewrite what you already wrote. As the company exposed to a higher cyber security risk, especially this first point, second point, unofficial cloud, all of that, and lack of required security measures. මොනවද security measures කියලා කියන්නේ අරක ලියන්න. Vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, because this helps you to figure out what are your gaps and then it requires you to strengthen. That is also not there. Then therefore higher possibility of what? Of one, data leakage, then I said prolonged system disruption, right? One is a data leakage, then unauthorized access. It may be even within the company, and more importantly, why this is disruption, right? Prolonged, you can say disruption. If a core banking or a core system, if a core system is being attacked, so there is a disruption, right? And the third risk is obviously reputational risk, because after the acquisition, if there is a data breach in this subsidiary, the whose reputation is damaged, this company is damaged, right? Because of the regulation again, right? So that lead to loss of customer confidence, regulatory actions, all of that against the main company, right? So what you can write here is that as FDPL, I hope the name is FDPL, as the acquiring company, or FDPL has weak security controls, higher chances of cyber risks, including data breaches, including data leakages. This could affect the customer confidence, right, and trigger regulatory actions, which ultimately tarnish, right, impact reputation of the main company. So that way you can simply write the reputational risk arising, right? And then we wrote those three risk bucket, and then finally you need to really justify. Remember, this answer also requires significance. Why these risks are significant to the acquisition decision, right? Why? Because these are hidden risks that can lead to regulatory actions, right? And then central bank wants you to suspend operation even there is a major issue, right? And then it can also lead to disruption. The same risk that we explained, these hidden risks that may not have happened, but there is a higher chance of happening, that increase the overall risk profile of the company, right? So then you need to immediately invest in the required control measures, like what? The governance process, the security VAPTL, specialized resources, right? And that will, what will happen when you do all of that? That can even impact the amount that you are going to pay, the valuation. So you may have to revisit if you haven't done. That could affect the valuation, and it could also impact the integration, how you are connecting. Right now, you can't just connect your processes, right? So when you integrate, if these internal controls are weak, you have to bring them to the same platform, then only integration. So that integration will be delayed, integration timeline can be affected, right? And then this may require further board deliberations. So those points you need to address, right? Right, so what you need to emphasize in this significance, right? Higher hidden risk, right? Right, this can be major, right? This can have a impact financially, reputationally, right? And even disruption if regulators take actions. Then more importantly, what you need to mention in that significance part of the answer is that the investments are required to strengthen security control, right? Including data protection, right? When we discuss the other matters like the yeah, so basically other resources, specialized resources, right? You need to bring consultants, all of that. That this will increase the cost of acquisition, right? So increasing the cost of acquisition is one, and then the other one is another sub point is this may delay integration. Now, as we speak in Sri Lanka, there are several integrations happening with global bank and local banks. You know what I'm speaking, right? Those integrations, you need to really look at their control processes are different. You can't just integrate. You need to take account of those differences, right? So this can delay integration, and also I'd say third point needs further, right? More deliberation at board level. Done. So the last part of the question, so easy, CASO framework. I told you in CASO framework, the part C of the answer, we can talk about 3 things, and then it's more important, what are the factors you are bringing from the case study, right? Then make CASO framework ke answer ekata lakunu 10ක් දෙනවනේ. So yeah, 10 marks, right? Effectiveness of HFL based on the CASO. So out of the CASO 5 component, right, we identified we can write something about the. So let's take මේ වගේ ප්‍රශ්නයක් ලේ දලුත් පිටුවක් ගමු අපි. So we spoke about the control environment. Bring the points. Remember, control environment refers to the tone at the top, right? You may use simple word like this in your answer. Tone at the top, and it represents the control culture, right? Being the AAA attitude, awareness, and actions of the board and management regarding internal controls and its importance. So in the case study, what is the factor that you can bring in to say that the controls are not good? And I read that paragraph that the case study clearly says that මෙන්න මේ කැලල extract කරගන්න. මේ copy paste. The lack of clear accountability for control ownership at senior management level, great emphasis on performance measures on the growth compared to the control effectiveness indicate a weak control culture, right? And that shows that the culture. එතකොට දැන් මේ මම ආයෙ ඔයාලට සැකනම් පෙන්නන්නම් මේ කැලේ එහෙමම copy paste කරන්න පුළුවන්. කොහොමද මේ control environment කියලා අපි mark කරලා තියෙන්නේ මේ. Specifically, accountability for control ownership at accountability වචනේ කියන්නේ board level වචනයක්, right? Accountability for control ownership at senior management is clear key performance blah blah blah. ඒක ඇල copy paste කරන්නකෝ. ඒක මම ආයෙ ලියන්න ඕනේ නැහැ නේ ඔයාලගේ time waste කරලා, right? So please write. Sorry. So what you have to write from the case study, as the case says, accountability from senior management specifically given, right? Accountability for senior management level, right? For the control ownership. Control ownership is weak as they are more focusing on the growth. So එතර ඒ විදිහටම ලියපු ගමන් done. Control environment. Then we can also write about risk assessment. එතනත් case study එකට ගියොත් තියෙනවා while company has implemented ISO 31000 risk management standard, it appears that risk management is not integrated. Risk management is not integrated to business operations and decision making, right? What is the best example we can give? Now, why it is not integrated? That how they have forgotten example, being a bank, why they haven't identified data protection, non-compliance as a key risk, why they haven't identified cyber as a key risk and implemented these required measures that indicate that the risk is not functioning. If this is flagged to the board of directors, they would have invested, right? Specifically, they wouldn't have looked at that new company, right? Specifically, when you are acquiring a company, they have to aggressively look into this criteria, right? Risk assessment need to be integrated. Then the third one, that because remember specifically we are writing actually part C about evaluate the effectiveness of control system of HFL using the CASO and analyze the extent to which reliance can be placed, right, on system in the context of proposed acquisition. So actually we are talking in relation to the acquisition in these questions. Then regarding control activities, right? When we say control activities, we are talking about what? Segregation of duties, authorizations, IT controls, and so on. Now this, if I again go to the case study and show you, there is a place they clearly say දැන් මා ආයෙ පෙන්නනවා ඔයාලට copy paste කරන එක. නැත්නම් ආයෙ time waste කරන්න ඕනේ නැහැ නේද? දැන් මේ control activities වලට අපි pick කරේ මෙන්න මේ ටික. Key controls within the lending operation system, right? Access management were found to be inadequate and or inconsistently applied. Manual override were observed without sufficient documentation. ඒ කැල කෙලින්ම ලියන්න පුළුවන් control activities. Specifically, those deficiencies, right, in the access controls, right, that relates to segregation of duty also, right, manual override. Easily you can write. Access control, manual override. Access. I mean, they are talking about the lending system, specifically. Manual override. Ekat case study එකෙන් ගන්න පුළුවන්, right? Then there's easily you can talk about the monitoring process. Monitoring controls have failed. So what paragraph you are going to bring from the case study? So remember, in theory, monitoring of control, there may have a line එකම ලියද්දී එක කැලක් ලියන්න control environment කියන්නේ tone at the top. Then it shows that you are a rich student, you know the concept, tone at the top. Risk assessment methodology. Risk assessment involves how do they identify, right, key risk, quantify and mitigate the key risk, right? And then control activities refers to the policies and procedures, right, implemented by the management to ensure the management directives are carried out. Specifically, segregation or duty authorization is good to have a small write-up. Monitoring means how do you ensure internal controls are effectively implemented, right? Is it an ongoing monitoring that is happening on a daily basis? So separate monitoring by internal audit, technically, right? So in the case study, when you go to the monitoring piece, I explained to you this information you can easily bring. See, monitoring, this one, management has responded here, this part. Monitoring week, delays in follow-up of internal audit recommendation, no mechanism to see independently verify implementation of the agreed action plan. එකයි මාර මෙතන specifically live independently monitoring. See, independent, ongoing monitoring of independent, separate. So what here they talk about internal audit findings are not followed up. Right, so it's very simply, students. Once you know these things, if you are thorough, you can easily bring from the case study and build your answer. So with that, you see how easily we answered 50 marks in the exam, right? So now let us also look at the last question also, that compared to these 3 questions, right, the first 2 were easy. But I will also show you the last question also easy, right? So let's watch.